So Jill, if you want to share your screen and start recording, and Kevin, please take it away.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a virtual town hall meeting, the Twin Cities virtual town hall meeting on the Twin Cities Milwaukee-Chicago second train. Thanks for joining us instead of being outside on the last couple hours of a very nice sunny day. Made a good choice. My name is Kevin Roggenbuck. I'm a senior transportation planner with Ramsey County Public Works. I'm also one of the staff to the Great River Rail Commission. So I'm doing a bit of an MC kind of role here for us today in facilitating our town hall meeting. The Great River Rail Commission is made up of elected officials from a number of local governments up and down the river from St. Paul to La Crosse. Representing 18 local governments, cities and counties in the Metropolitan Planning Organization in La Crosse. We're advocating for more frequent trains and faster train service between the Twin Cities and Chicago. But before we get started with our presentation, just wanted to get through a couple of housekeeping items. Due to the size of the forum, we're going to keep your microphone muted, just so there's no interruptions and things like that. So we encourage you to keep your camera on, though, in case you have a reaction, you want to raise your hand and put something into the chat, and so we'll help you do that. So thanks to the many of you who submitted questions ahead of time. We have a number of questions that we'll get to toward the end of our presentation, and then you can also put more questions into the chat as you hear our presentation and something strikes you as curious. It might spark a question or a comment in your mind. Please put that in the chat box as we're moving through the presentation. We have a number of speakers here who will discuss the second train with you this evening. We intend to wrap up the presentation and everything in about an hour. So maybe you can still get outside and enjoy a little bit of sunshine at the end of this meeting, if possible. And at this time, I would like to introduce Ramsey County Commissioner Trista Matas Castillo, and following her will be St. Paul City Council Member Jane Prince, both members of the Great River Rail Commission. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to say, I know you're probably zoomed out for the day, but if you're willing to turn on your camera, it's so great to be in company of people who are like-minded and excited about a second train to and from Chicago and all the stops in between. I think this is a perfect way. I was telling Jeff earlier today, it's a perfect way to wrap out Earth Day is to talk about a second train, because a second train really has significant benefits to our environment. I was doing a little research before the meeting, and I learned that train travel is 4% of the emissions that air travel is per passenger. So as we're thinking about it's Earth Day, we're caring about the Earth, we're thinking about how do we reduce carbon and CO2 emissions. Train travel is a way to do it. And I like to say is you don't have to always sacrifice. We think about preserving the Earth and we have to do all these things and cut back. But you can actually indulge in luxurious train travel and protect our environment and Earth. So it's a great opportunity. So excited that you're here with us tonight. You're gonna hear lots of things about the train. You're gonna hear why commission members are so excited. And we are so close. We are at the finish line to get a second train dedicated to and from Chicago. So we'll talk more about the benefits this evening, but so happy to have you here. I am very passionate about transit equity and environmental improvements, and the train is going to make that happen for us in our region. So thanks for being here, and turn on your cameras if you're willing. I'll turn it over to Jane.
Thank you. I am so happy to join Trista in welcoming all of you to learn more about our Great River Rail. I believe Twin Cityans are going to love the way 2 trains a day to Chicago and back will make that city and all the great stops in between closer and more accessible to all of us. From Red Wing to Winona, La Crosse and beyond, tourists, college students, and business travelers will enjoy more frequent passenger train access to these destinations. And just like Trista said, it is the most enjoyable way to travel. You can rest while you're on your way, or you can get that business presentation completed while you're working or catch up on all your emails. Plus, it'll provide efficient transport for businesses to move freight. Tonight, you'll learn why this proposal makes sense, not just for you, but for the vitality of our whole region. Now I'm going to turn it over to the President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, Jonathan Weinhagen.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks, Commissioner Castillo. Great to see both of you, good friends who are doing incredible work, and grateful for the opportunity to be here advocating for this project, this additional line. You know, for us, it's all about the economic competitiveness of the Minneapolis-St. Paul region into the future. Bottom line, we know that transit in our region and transit that connects us to other regions is the key to the future. I think it's so poignant that we're sitting here in the waning hours of Earth Day, because there's certainly an environmental component to this project as well. But we've spent the last year managing through a pandemic, dealing with civil unrest, but really understanding the reality of how interconnected we are. We're telling people every day at the state legislature that a strong Minneapolis-St. Paul needs a strong greater Minnesota. A strong greater Minnesota needs a strong Minneapolis-St. Paul. And I think that extends beyond our borders. And there's nothing that could be, more beneficial than to physically connect us. And that's what an additional line does. That's what an additional train a day does. And I'll tell you, I'll be the first person in line to buy a ticket and be connecting myself to Chicago and to other parts of our community, and to be a booster for that increased freight and increased business travel. It's a really important investment, and I think now's the time as we think about preparing for an economic recovery, preparing for the potential for $2 trillion of infrastructure investment from the federal government, preparing to leverage $1.9 trillion in American Rescue Plan dollars. I mean, there is no better time than right now to continue to advocate and advance a project like this. So really grateful for all of you, again, to spend a little bit of time with us on a beautiful kind of early spring evening to learn more about this project and to ask questions and be a part of this dialogue. And with that, I get to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Maureen Scallon-Thaler with the Dakota County Regional Chamber.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for that kind introduction. And we are just thrilled to be a part of this program. Just a couple of things. Dakota County is actually the third largest county in the state of Minnesota, with well over 450,000 residents. We are one of the fastest growing counties in the state of Minnesota. We also feel very strongly and advocate for transit and the expansion of transit. We conducted a study approximately a year and a half ago on transit opportunities specifically for Dakota County. How can we get better transit to be able to move our residents, our employees, and our visitors throughout Dakota County? And through that, we came up with various recommendations. And we know Dakota County and the cities in Dakota County might not directly be impacted by the second train, but we will be indirectly impacted. Anytime we can bring people in from other states to our communities, I hate to say it, we've got the Vikings in Eagan. There's so much opportunity to bring visitors, and what this second train does is it helps increase and benefit our hospitality community and the hotels and the attractions. As Jonathan has commented, this industry has just been decimated. They are hanging on by a fingernail. We need to do everything possible to help this industry. And when you add a second train, bringing it into St. Paul, it just does wonders. The other thing, the train does offer business travels a little bit more work-friendly environment compared to driving or even flying. Being stuck in that middle seat is just not as comfortable as we would like it to be. And to be able to sit back and work on, our work and just relax, it's so much better. Plus, we don't have to drive. And I don't know about you guys, but driving from Chicago to Minneapolis is something I don't care to do. And I will actually have Jonathan buy my ticket and I'll ride with Jonathan to Chicago and then he can take me to a baseball game. Right, Jonathan? But the other thing, you know, as Jonathan has mentioned, and I will echo, that transportation investments that we make into our region, like the second train, really makes the state more attractive to bring businesses to the state of Minnesota. It brings new employees. It's an infusion of just economic development that, regardless of where they go, the region benefits overall. And while we might not all ride the train, as Jonathan mentioned, moving goods and services is so important. I mean, that adds, just from the business shipping capacity, by adding 40 million in track infrastructure improvements in the southern Minnesota, which is only costing the state about 10 million. So right there, you'll see the economic impacts and the value of that. You know, as I said, transit and improving transit and expanding and letting us all connect to be able to move people throughout Minnesota and out of Minnesota is critical for the success of not only the business community, but the state overall. And I really want to take this moment to acknowledge all the public officials, elected officials, who have worked tirelessly on this project. You know, you're coming into the home stretch, and that's great. And all the agency leaders too, who have overseen the work so that Minnesota gets the maximum return for its investment. So again, Dakota County Regional Chamber of Commerce is honored to be here. Mark Loftus, our interim president of the chamber, is with us. Mark comes with deep roots from DEED to Dakota Electric Association. And Mark, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Maureen, thank you very much. And thank you, Trista. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Jonathan, for those excellent words and for a great introduction to this forum. At this time, I think, Jeff, you're going to queue up a survey for us. All right, here it is. We'd like a little bit of audience participation here. We'd like you to fill out, take a little break here before we begin our presentation, fill out a very brief 3-question survey. The questions are on your screen right now. Please go ahead and click your answers and we'll see the results almost immediately. So we'll just pause here for a few seconds while you do that. And I have to do mine as well. So here we go. There you go. And when you're finished, just click the blue and white submit at the bottom of the screen. Okay, the responses, oh, here we go. The responses are up now. Have you ever traveled on Amtrak's Empire Builder? 84% said yes. There are a few of us here who haven't traveled yet. So this is going to be a good opportunity for you to learn more about passenger rail and take the opportunity to ride the train east or west. You can go in towards Chicago, you can take it west through North Dakota and out to the West Coast. That's the Amtrak's Empire Builder that runs through our region. Second question, if the second train is implemented, there will be operating and inventory savings for freight shippers. How much do you think freight shippers and others will save in operating costs and inventory savings over 30 years? That was our question. A number of you, well, most of you said $34 million, and that is the correct answer. $34 million is the estimated amount of savings for freight shippers and inventory and operating savings over the 30-year estimate of this project that was part of a federal grant that was jointly submitted by MnDOT and Wisconsin Departments of Transportation. Over $1 million a year saved for freight by the improvements for the second train and operation of the second train. Third question, how many annual tourism dollars do you think could result from the second train? and a number of answers there, and most of you picked the correct answer. It is $4 million that would be pumped into our regional economy. All the river communities, whether you have a station or not, people will take the train into your community. They'll come to see events. They'll come visit family and friends, and they'll add $4 million to our economy just through tourism. So thank you for taking that survey. We've got another one coming up a little bit later, so keep your clicking fingers ready. At this time, I'd like to introduce Frank Letterly from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. He'll kick off our presentation on the Twin Cities Milwaukee-Chicago Intercity Passenger Rail Project, or as we call it, the TCMC second train. Frank is one of the people in Minnesota Department of Transportation, Wisconsin DOT, and Illinois DOT who are leading this study and getting all the hard work done. So Frank, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Yes, my name is Frank Letterly, and I am the TCMC project manager for MnDOT. And it's a real pleasure to be here tonight to talk about the project. Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois have been pursuing the TCMC project for nearly a decade, including a 2015 Amtrak-led feasibility study. We got to get on the right, there we go. The purpose of the TCMC second train is to address gaps in the regional transportation system. And it's the opportunity to provide greater convenience and flexibility and greater travel options, especially for small and mid-sized communities along the route. We'll also address issues with the existing Empire Builder service. The TCMC route is the same as the Empire Builder service between Seattle, Portland, and Chicago, which includes stops in St. Paul, Red Wing, and Winona in Minnesota. Often the Empire Builder is late because of weather and railroad construction and congestion to the east of St. Paul, to the west of St. Paul. So on-time reliability heading to Chicago will be greatly enhanced since the TCMC will originate in St. Paul. Despite the reliability issues, prior to the pandemic, the Empire Builder was full or nearly full every day. Now, again, as you can see on the screen, the route of the TCMC starts in St. Paul. It stops in Red Wing, in Winona, in La Crosse, and several stations in Wisconsin, as well as Milwaukee and Chicago. Next slide. The project features the main feature of the project is a second round trip option for people traveling between St. Paul and Chicago, is supplementing the existing Empire Builder service. It will serve 13 total stations, including 3 stations in Minnesota, St. Paul, in Minnesota, including St. Paul, Red Wing, and Winona. During fiscal year 2019, the Empire Builder saw 132,000 passengers board at Minnesota stations. We project that will almost double, with the Empire Builder continuing to carry a little over 120,000 trips, and TCMC carrying about the same number, about 124,000 trips. So we're not taking people off the Empire Builder and putting them on TCMC. We're actually nearly doubling the number of people that are going to be traveling between St. Paul and Chicago. The train is designed to operate at a maximum speed of 79 miles per hour. It's going to be a little bit faster to Chicago, about 7.5 hours, because the train's a little bit shorter and the dwell time at stations will be shorter. But this really significant is that the schedule is going to be more convenient for people, because it will be about 4 to 6 hours difference from the departure and arrival times of the Empire Builder. Incidentally, the Federal Railroad Administration has ranked the Chicago to Minneapolis-St. Paul corridor first in the Midwest for enhanced service. Next slide. Here is the proposed schedule that complements the Empire Builder. You can see that the westbound train starts in Chicago at around 11 o'clock and arrives in St. Paul at about 6 o'clock, quarter after 6. In the eastbound direction, the train arrives in departs St. Paul at 11:47. This is the this is where the train starts. So all of the issues that the Empire Builder has with congestion and construction and weather to the west of Minnesota doesn't exist. So the train will always be starting on time going to Chicago, and will arrive in Chicago around 7 p.m. So if we take a look at the next slide, you can see the difference in the timing. The Empire Builder currently leaves St. Paul when it's on time at 8 a.m. So it's a little bit early for a lot of us. The 11:47 time will give another good option for people who want to get to Chicago. And the westbound train arrives at 6 p.m., which compared to 10 p.m. for the Empire Builder. So you can see that what we're trying to do is not just have a second train, but have a little bit more of a convenient schedule. So as we look at the next slide, what we're going to see are the benefits of the train are eastbound is much more reliable. And in general, it's better travel options, better time of day options, and greater capacity, because as I mentioned before, the Empire Builder it typically operates full. And there are times when someone like me looks to see if we can take the train and it's full, so we can't get on. So this will be an opportunity for people who might have wanted to take the train and couldn't because it was full to actually be able to take the trip. So as we move on to the next slide, you'll see we'll start to talk about some of the improvements that we are anticipating for Minnesota. Now, this first slide is a slide of the Midway station, which was the former Amtrak station in St. Paul. What we're thinking is that this building will probably be reused as the place where we store the train overnight, and where the crew will base out of, and where we do some minor maintenance and cleaning of the train. In the next slide, we can start to take a look at some of the track improvements. Many of the track improvements, or most, I would rather say most of the track improvements are in Minnesota. Approximately $40 million will be spent on track improvements that will ensure that the passenger train service can operate reliably without affecting freight train traffic. And this means providing opportunities for passenger trains and freight trains to pass each other without stopping. In Winona, this will involve the construction of a new siding track on the north side of town that connects the main line, connecting the main line to the CP main line as it goes off to the west. A significant advantage of some of these improvements is that switches will be powered and it will be faster for trains to move from one track to another. Also in Winona, down by the station, on the next slide, you can see that we will be upgrading a parallel track that will allow the Amtrak train, the TCMC, as well as the Empire Builder, to get a little bit closer to the Winona station. This extra siding track will allow more efficient train meets and the ability to clear the main track more quickly and efficiently. It will also improve safety for passengers who can board the train from the track adjacent to the platform, instead of the current condition today where passengers have to walk across that siding track. I should also note that the Winona Station platform is going to be improved by Amtrak through a separate project, which will also, in addition to improving safety, make the platform and the station more ADA compliant. Farther to the south at River Junction, you can see on the map that what we have is a location where tracks come together from 3 different directions. The track on the right comes across the river, across the Mississippi from Wisconsin, and the north-south track goes south to Iowa. So what we're going to do here, this is one of those major bottlenecks on the freight system. We're going to create a much greater opportunity for trains to move continuously without having to stop and wait for other trains. And we're going to do that by adding the orange section that is shown on this particular slide. We're going to take a siding track and turn it into a main track, which means that the trains will be able to operate faster. And will also be operating under dispatch control, which also increases the speed. On the next slide, you can see we're also going to be doing improvements on the river bridge and on the connection to the river bridge. So that also includes adding mainline track and realigning tracks and switches, all with the idea of one, increasing the speed. The speed, for example, on the bridge will be increased from 10 to 25 miles an hour, but the other tracks in the area will increase even more. And again, the intent of these track improvements are to guarantee that when we are operating both the Empire Builder and TCMC, that those trains will be able to operate reliably and on time without being interfered with by freight trains, and in turn, without interfering with freight trains. So this is not only an advantage for our passenger train service, it's an advantage to the railroad itself, because they're going to be able to increase the speed of their freight trains as well. And this, anytime you speed up a freight train, you are speeding up the service that you're providing to shippers in Minnesota, as well as in Wisconsin. Finally, across the river in La Crosse, similar improvements where we're going to take a siding track, turn it into a mainline track, again, to allow trains to pass each other, especially when a passenger train is in the station, and improve some of the yard tracks. And in both, in all of these locations, in La Crosse, in River Junction, and Winona, we're also going to be upgrading grade crossings. And one of the results of the speed increases, the train speed increases, is that trains will be moving through town faster, and the time that gates are down will be lower. So it'll be a general improvement just to circulation for automobiles within all of these communities. So in summary, we're looking at about $53 million of capital costs for track and signal improvements. $40 million of that is right here in Minnesota. The operating cost is going to be about $12 million. 40% of that will be paid for by fares, and the rest of it we're going to be splitting between Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, because all three states are sharing in this project. So with that, I believe, am I handing it back to you, Kevin?
Yes, Frank, I'll take it over from here. A little bit of information yet about project funding. A number of project partners have already provided funding for this project. $6.5 million is available from Wisconsin Department of Transportation. They have bonding authority waiting for committee approval, and then we can use those funds. Amtrak has committed $5 million to the project as well, that would be split between the improvements in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And the big number you see there is a federal, it's called CRISI grant. I don't remember the acronym, but it's a Federal Railroad Administration grant for the improvement of freight and passenger rail tracks. $31.8 million in a federal grant was secured by Wisconsin and Minnesota Departments of Transportation for the construction of this project. And then finally, the number down below, 12.6 in another federal grant. Operating funding has been secured that we can spread out over the first 3 years of startup service for the second train, so we can defray the state costs of operating the second train as we get started for the first 3 years. And as ridership builds, will increase revenue in the train as we collect more fares, and the state operating subsidies will decrease.
And Kevin, on the next steps, we're nearly complete with the environmental review. By the end of the year, we'll have the categorical exclusion completed. We are going to be securing state funding from both Minnesota and Wisconsin. And we're going to be ready to move to the next step, which will be final design and prepare for construction. And this project, the project benefits, it's going to create jobs. It's going to create economic growth. Whenever you get people moving faster and more efficiently, people move for a reason. They move to do things. And when they do things, they promote economic activity and economic growth. It's a great alternative to driving or flying. As mentioned, it's a very comfortable way to travel. The fact that the train doesn't just fly over Winona and Toma and the Dells and so forth means that it's also improves access for the small towns along the corridor. And that's very important for the economy of these smaller towns. We mentioned the improved freight train speed and efficiency, and of course, we're also improving safety.
Great, thank you, Frank. I'll take it from here and talk a little bit more about the benefits of the second train. I think when a lot of people think of a second passenger train between here and Chicago, they only think of the convenience of riding it as a passenger train. I've got another option. I can get a ticket a little bit earlier, a little bit later in the day, coming and going between St. Paul and Chicago and all the points in between. But there are a lot of economic benefits to this project as well. There's a great return on investment. For every dollar spent on this project and constructing this project, there's $2.44 in economic, environmental, safety, and time savings benefits that are realized along the entire route between here and Chicago. The regional and statewide economies benefit from jobs that are created, from an increase in freight and shipping capacity, from an increase in tourism activity, and from Minnesota businesses who sold $71 million worth of goods and services to Amtrak in 2019. And that number has been going up over the years. And Amtrak is more than just a service provider here in the Minnesota too. It's part of Minnesota's economy. Then Amtrak had paid $27.5 million in state taxes. I believe that is in 2019. They have 983 employees based in Minnesota. So they have almost 1,000 employees here in our state. And they donated $1 million in different charitable contributions in the state as well. On the next slide, we can see a little bit more about the specific benefits that went into part of that federal grant application we described. Freight shipping benefits, freight and operating inventory cost savings. As we mentioned, that was one of our survey questions you did so well on. $34 million saved over 30 years. Freight shippers will realize this much money over 30 years, over $1 million a year due to the track and signal improvements required for the second train. As Frank mentioned, some of those improvements in La Crescent and on the swing bridge between La Crescent and La Crosse will increase train speeds. They're not going to be zooming through that area, but they won't be stopping. They won't be stopping for signals. They won't be stopping for other trains as much. They can continuously move through that area and save money as they move through. From the Chrissy grant, we learned that it costs about $1,200, about $1,200 an hour to operate a freight train. So when you can save that much time moving a freight train through these two pinch points, the operators, the shippers are going to save a lot of money, and that's also money that can be passed on to their customers as well. And these improvements are one of the reasons why Canadian Pacific supported the federal grant application for improvements on their railroad, because Canadian Pacific is the host railroad. They own the tracks that our second train would run on and that Amtrak's Empire Builder runs on now. On the next slide rather, we have some good information about how it benefits colleges and benefits access in the region. Scott Olson, the president of Winona State University, said higher education competition for students and faculty is fierce across the country. So they're competing for students to enroll, they're competing for faculty to teach these students. We feel that they're at a disadvantage when students compare alternative transportation options for getting to and from schools in Minnesota versus other states. Trains are a sales tool for recruitment, and that's a quote that President Olson allowed us to use on this advocacy piece of material here. And the survey says the numbers are right there. 41% of the students at Winona State University in St. Mary's have taken the train tour from school. That includes my son. And 57% they would take the train more frequently if more service was available. So if more service was available, these students would be able to take the train more often. Parents wouldn't have to come get them. They wouldn't have to own and maintain a car on campus to get to and from home. So it's a big benefit for them. Winona State campus is just a few blocks from Winona Depot. It's easy walking distance for Winona State students. And this kind of service to Winona and Red Wing as well, and other communities in Wisconsin, and even the smaller communities in Illinois, it's a measure of transportation equity for these communities, because it's very expensive to connect from a small town into a larger city and fly somewhere. A lot of small towns have intercity bus service that's very infrequent, maybe again once a day, just like the train service is here. This provides a measure of transportation equity for those small communities, so people can get out and about and get across the country without having to drive or without having to spend a lot of money on an airplane ticket. On the next slide, we have some information about tourism. The second train benefits tourism. Another one of these survey questions that you nearly aced. About $4 million in spending annually will come about through the second train. And we arrived at this number through some Amtrak information that almost half of their passengers are considered tourists. They're on trips to visit or to recreate or enjoy sites and entertainment around the region. The average tourist spends about $200 in Minnesota. That was some information that we gathered from a visitors bureau here in Minnesota. And out of the 124,000 annual trips that are expected on the second train, almost 40,000 are in Minnesota, coming and going from Minnesota, either getting on a train in Minnesota, getting off in Minnesota. So that's a lot of attractions here in Minnesota and a lot of riders. It's very easy also to visit family and friends. When we think of tourists, they aren't just people with cameras around their necks taking pictures of buildings and the river. These are people coming to visit family and friends, and to it could be even Winona State coming to a grandson's graduation or something like that. On the next slide, some more information about business travelers and the benefits that come from being able to work on the train. By choosing a train over the car, business travelers can gain about $64 million in productive time over 30 years. You can't do that when you're driving. You can't work while you're driving. You are gripping the wheel and you're keeping your car on the road. So there's almost $2 million, about $2 million annually. Business riders use about 75% of their train time on their trip to be productive. They can rest, but they can also get busy and do some work. The gentleman in this photo, I think, has more leg room than I do right now. I've got a little bit more table space, but he's comfortably working. And in the observation car, there are tables and chairs. You can sit around a table with 3 other people, and you can have a meeting on the train, and you can look out the window and enjoy the sights and keep on working. And by the picture too, you can tell it's much easier to work on a train than it is on an airplane. You know, try doing that on an airplane and coach. It's not very easy. On the next slide, some information about environment and safety benefits from the second train. In the first year of operation, we think it's 2024, in the first full year of operation, 124,000 trips would reduce vehicle miles of travel by a staggering 17.4 million miles. That's just, the numbers are huge. 17.4 million miles. That's an average trip of about 137 miles for every rider that we forecast in the first full year of operation, which isn't very far. People may go longer distances and it may be more. As ridership increases, that number will increase too. And when we can reduce vehicle miles of travel that much, we avoid vehicle emissions over that period of time. $6.75 million in avoided vehicle emissions and damage to the environment, harmful emissions are reduced by taking the train over the car. And trains are safe. In 2019, 96% of all travel fatalities occurred on roads, only 2% on trains and 1% on airplanes. Reducing vehicle miles of travel reduces the risk of automobile crashes, not only of fatalities, but property damage and other kinds of injuries that result from traveling long distances, getting tired, driving in the dark, driving on icy roads, something I don't like to do at all. Thanks to safety improvements, the train and motor vehicle collisions have declined sharply from 1972, and positive train control is another reason why that's happened. We've implemented a number of improvements at crossings and a lot of good education to drivers to avoid train crossings and be safe when they're crossing tracks. And positive train control further strengthens the safety of riding in a train, and it strengthens the rail freight movement as well, because rail freight uses positive train control also. On the next slide, what's in it for the Twin Cities at this point? I am going to turn it back over to Trista Matas Castillo, and she'll tell you what's in it for the Twin Cities.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. We've got a ton of information, and if you're not already super excited like I am, I've heard this information over and over and over, and I get more excited every time. So if you're not ready to go book your tickets and call your legislators to say we have to have the second train, then you are asleep, because we are so excited. I do want to also acknowledge tonight, we were supposed to have Representative Alice Hausman, who has been our incredible champion to carry these bills year after year to make sure that we can get funding for the second train. She is unable to be with us because she is right now on the House floor in session, fighting for us in Minnesota and making sure that this is a priority. And so on behalf of Representative Hausman, I've been asked to speak about what's in it for the Twin Cities specifically. So we heard about environmental impacts, we heard about the safety improvements and freight improvements and tourism and all of the things that have been talked about on what's in it. But I want to get down into the nitty gritty. You know, we have had a really intense year, and the last week has been really intense. And I'm specifically talking about the murder of George Floyd and the trial. And it has forced us to have a different conversation in Minnesota about what equity looks like. And I will tell you that this train is a piece to equity, because train travel, as we heard, is often less expensive. It's more accessible. People of color can access it, low-income communities, and people with disabilities can access the train much easier than having to go to the airport or or even if they don't have a car. And so when we think about how we take the next step forward to invest in equity, this train is a huge piece of it. You don't need real ID to travel on the train. You can buy a ticket on your phone or at the station and get on a train relatively easily. It's handicap accessible, it's wide aisles, people can move around. I know my mother-in-law lives in Chicago. She's an immigrant from Guatemala, and she will not fly, but she uses the train. And so we spend a lot of time on the train back and forth. And it really does show that everyone, regardless of income, has that access. And when we think about transit equity, it is good for all of us. It is good for our economy. It's good for our region. It is good for the Twin Cities. And so, on top of it, Amtrak spends more than $71 million in goods and services in Minnesota. And more than half of the business that they do in Minnesota is with businesses from people of color and women-owned businesses. So again, it's an equity piece. And so it's really imperative that we get there with the second train. So I know we have a lot of people on. I'm seeing so many familiar faces and names who have worked really hard to make sure that we get the funding that we need for the second train. What we still need is that we need $10 million of our match to unleash the federal dollars that are already on the table, the commitment from Wisconsin. We need the $10 million. We're currently included in a House bonding bill. We need to make sure that we're in the Senate version of the bill and that the Senate has a version of the bill. And we need to make sure that when the end time comes to make those decisions, that we are not cut out, because this is the year. It can't wait for next year. It can't wait for in the future. It needs to happen this year, because we have the federal dollars on the table, and we know it's good for our economy. We know that it's good for jobs and services. And as we are rebuilding, as we are coming back from a pandemic, when we are coming back for civil unrest, we need to make sure that we're unleashing every single dollar available to us to bring back our systems. You know, I represent Ramsey County, and St. Paul is so critical. And we're co-hosting with the Minneapolis Chamber in Dakota County, and the train, if we get the train into St. Paul, it can connect easily to light rail options and into other areas, and bus options into other parts of the city. But we need to get people into St. Paul first. And it becomes a catalyst. You know, we have this big project that we're working on to build River's Edge, which is apartments and hotel and Class A office space in St. Paul. And I know for sure that this second train will be a catalyst to make that happen, because our Class A office space, our office space that we've heard a lot about, has, you know, been shifting through the pandemic, where people working from home and they're trying to figure out, do we come back? Do we come back and occupy space? But if they can occupy space and then have access to travel throughout the region in the same day, it's going to help us recruit businesses back to our downtown, and which means that we're going to produce more tax revenue, which helps all of us. So there is so much to gain with the second train to and from to Chicago. in addition to all the things that we just heard about safety improvements and freight and all of those things, we know that this is an economic generator to help us recover, to make sure that we're investing in equity and that we have a successful Twin Cities. So I'm going to stop talking. As you can tell, I'm excited. I love the train. I'm not trying to sell it to you, but I want you to be engaged. I want you to reach out to your legislators. I see Dennis is going to add, and he's going to tell us how to do that. But we need to make sure that we're reaching out to our legislators, reach out over and over and over, and tell them that we need $10 million this year, not next year, not in a future bonding bill, this year. It's critical. Dennis.
Oh, thank you. Just as very excited as you can tell, and we are very close. And I just wanted to let people know, when you are reaching out to your legislators, be aware that Representative Hausman has been championing a $10 million plus bonding bill. It's House File 1639. The House in their capital investment has included $25 million for passenger rail. In that $25 million is dollars that would be made available for the second train. On the Senate side, when you're reaching out to your senators, and if you're talking to either Senator Miller, Senator Goggin, Senator Pappas, they have authored a bill, Senate File 1962, which also includes money for passenger rail. And so as the two bodies come together and start talking about what ultimately will that capital investment bond and bonding bill look like, those are the two vehicles that we are involved in. So again, thank Senator Miller for being the chief author in the Senate. Senator Goggin out of Red Wing jumped on, and Senator Pappas out of St. Paul jumped on. So those three are helping usher the Senate version or part of that version of what the House has already done. So just I wanted to give you some context so that you, when you are talking to legislators, those are the vehicles. The Senate has not adopted a capital investment bill as of yet. And so there is ample time for your work, your voices to engage your senators and encourage, one, a bonding bill coming out of the Senate, and two, that they include the $10 million for the second train. And also, we need to give credit to the governor and to his staff. The governor has put $10 million in his bonding bill. He did it. One is because it's good for Minnesota, but also because it was accessing federal funds. And so now, as Trista and others have said, is the time to get us across that finish line. But in context, that's kind of where we're at on the capital investment side.
Kevin, ordinarily at this point, we would go ahead with another survey, but oh man, we've got a whole bunch of questions here and we're running out of time. And so I'm thinking we're going to skip the survey again, this second set of survey questions. Is it all right if we jump into questions from both people online here, but also those of you who submitted questions in advance?
Absolutely, yes. Dennis and Trista, thank you for wrapping up the presentation, and Jeff, thank you for noting all those questions we've received. Jeff, go ahead and let's get started on answering these questions.
That sounds good. Thank you, Kevin. And I do want to also say, for those of you who are online wondering who exactly Jeff Daler and Dennis Egan are, we're each consultants working on behalf of the Great River Rail Commission. Dennis on the legislative side and myself on the public community engagement side. I may ask Maureen and Jonathan to jump in if I see Maureen is still here. I'm not sure if Jonathan still is, but this first question from Robert Clarkson kind of is up your alley, and let me read through this from Robert. So TCMC is a regional meaning the Chicago to Minneapolis, St. Paul region, sustainable alternative to motor vehicle and air transportation that proposes to improve freight capacity and increase tourism. He says, as a TCMC supporter, the case for the project is stronger if its intended market is broader than tourism. How can the service be marketed to private business and corporate interests to tap this market and ensure business travel becomes a staple function of the service. So is that something, Maureen, that you think you could address?
I'll attempt to address it. It's it's a great question. So as far as the business side of it, we have many, how many Fortune 500 companies here in the state of Minnesota? Those are the companies that are really going to be most interested in this project, because as we all know, we're seeing the unemployment going, down and the need for workers going up, especially in the manufacturing area. And sometimes these people might be coming from other parts of the state, whether they live in Winona or La Crosse. This is an opportunity. It's a job opportunity to bring, jobs up into Minnesota. So the business side case is very compelling because it brings new employers. We could be attracting new businesses, as I said in my opening remarks, to the state, which again attracts employees. We see a generation, and one of our findings in our transit study is the younger generations want alternative modes of transportation to get around. So whether it's rail, it's high speed, it's BRT, it's regular traditional transit. That's what they're looking for. And this second train makes that happen. So it's a very compelling business case. We just need to ensure we're engaging our corporate partners in so they can echo these comments.
I appreciate that, Maureen. I think you're right that engaging those other businesses, those corporate folks who will see a benefit from this, and hearing their voices will be really important. Ronald Scheck asks, I think you should consider a third train between Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Twin Cities, and maybe it could be an overnight train. Frank Letterly, how would you address that question?
Well, I think that would be an exciting prospect as well. Overnight trains are something that used to be pretty common, and if you go to Europe, they're starting to institute more and more of those there as well. I think the bottom line, though, is if we can get this train going, if we can get the second train going, and people are as excited about it as we hope they will be, then we will certainly be taking a look at some other options in the future.
I know that the Great River Rail Commission's vision is for the second train to show that people will take it, will use that second train, and that could be the impetus for further development of additional passenger rail service. Bill Dredge says, when do you think the second train will be a reality? And I think that was answered during the presentation, where as soon as 2023, end of 2023, but for sure in 2024, if funding is secured now. Jerry Ratliff asks, does Hennepin County and the city of Minneapolis support efforts for the second train? And if yes, have they contacted their legislators? I'm not sure if any of us can answer that question. I do see Commissioner Matas Castillo's hand raised. I don't know if you can address this one. You might have the answer to another question. So Trista, go ahead.
Yeah, I know I have talked to several of the commissioners in Hennepin County, and they definitely support the second train. Whether they've contacted their legislators, I don't know, but I will make sure to call them. And if you live in Hennepin County, call your commissioners and tell them to call their legislators to help us out, because this is really, really important. I know we're getting close to time and we have a few more questions to answer, but I actually wanted to ask a favor. If you are near your computer and you can turn your camera on, I would love to take a picture of all of us and send it to our legislators of how many people care about the second train. So if you're by your computer here in the next couple of minutes, if you just turn your camera on for a minute, we're going to take a picture and send it to our legislators to say we care about trains and that we need to fund it. So thanks, but keep asking questions in the meantime.
Very good. And if I know Trista, she'll be tweeting this besides. So.
Yes, I will.
Robert Clarkson asks, for those passengers interested in going to or from Rochester, Minnesota, will there be some kind of connecting service between Winona and Rochester?
The answer to that is yes. Amtrak is, there's already a way to do that, but I think Amtrak is going to be looking at their official Amtrak thruway service connecting from either Winona or La Crescent to get up to, or both, to get to Rochester.
Very good. Thank you, Frank. Leon asks, how do efforts for the TCMC differ in the Twin Cities in comparison to other communities down the river? What specifics would help the Twin Cities that would not necessarily help others down the river? And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Leon, but what's Greater Minnesota benefits, the Twin Cities benefits? How does that differ? Is that kind of what you're asking? Yep, nodding yes. Okay. Maybe pretty much any of you, Frank or Kevin or even Trista, how do you see the differences in how the TCMC can benefit these different communities, whether it's the metro area or the river towns?
I think one way it benefits the communities in Winona in particular, about $40 million worth of improvements will be in the city of Winona and La Crescent and the bridge just a little bit farther to the southeast. So that's a real tangible benefit for the city of Winona, where trains can move through the city a little bit faster without engineers getting off the train and throwing switches manually and stopping the train, starting the train. I know that firsthand, dropping off my son and waiting for a train to clear Huff Street so I could go back home. So that'll be a benefit, a tangible benefit for Winona. Having a station in your city for St. Paul, for Red Wing and Winona is another benefit. You've got that much more service for your citizens, of the citizens of your community. But even if you don't have a station in your community, Dakota County Chamber of Commerce, I'm so glad you're here today. I'm a Dakota County resident too. This benefits me, as I just described. My son goes to school in Winona. Even though there's no station in Dakota County, that's okay. I'll drive to St. Paul. I'll bring my son there. I'll drop him off. He'll get on the train and I'll be home in 20 minutes rather than a 4-hour turn and burn car ride to drop him off back there, or have him try to arrange a ride with some other kids that I'm not sure if they're safe to drive or not. So it's so much better for all of us who are even not just necessarily in a station city, but close to it, so we can all use it. It benefits all of us within access. There's a statistic, I'm not going to remember it exactly, but I want to say about 60% of Minnesota's population lives within 30 miles of a train station on this route, on the Empire on TCMC second train route, or within connecting service, like the question was asked of Rochester getting into Winona and La Crosse. So 60% of the state's population is in 30 miles from a station, and that's way easier than driving to wherever you need to go, or getting, it takes you that long just to get to the airport and park and get into a plane if you want to fly somewhere. So it benefits everyone greatly.
Very good. I've got a couple of questions here from the chat. I'm going to get to those. I'll kind of bounce back and forth between who still have a couple of questions that came in before the session as well. Mark Loftus asks a couple of questions. One is, what portion of the current travel on this route is for business purposes compared to casual and tourism ridership? And how might that change with a second train? And I wished Derek James with Amtrak was here. He'd be able to answer that question in a flash. I'm not sure if any of us know what the kind of the ratio is as far as business travelers versus tourism on the Empire Builder currently.
In general terms, Amtrak estimates about 46% of the riders are tourists. So, do the math. If you're not a tourist, you're probably a business traveler, or you're a student going on a purposeful trip to get to school or back home from school. So, yeah, there are a lot more business travelers, I think, than we realize.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I would say the potential is unlimited. As we talked about refilling our office space in our downtowns, when you have access to be able to say, hey, bring your company to downtown St. Paul, because if you want to travel to Chicago or to the Midwest or to Wisconsin or Madison, and all you have to do is hop on the train that's outside your door. I mean, it really is a catalyst for our businesses in the Twin Cities.
I would like to add that as we talked about whether or not Dakota County, for instance, how does Dakota County benefit from the second train? having spent the first 18 years of my life in Eagan, Minnesota, I can tell you that it's just as easy to drive to Union Depot in St. Paul as it is to drive to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport in Minneapolis from Eagan, Minnesota. And the same is true for those people that live in Lake City, Minnesota, or Wabasha, Minnesota, to be able to drive to Red Wing or to drive to Winona to be able to access the train station. Jack Barbier asks, has there been any movement to introduce a companion bill to Representative Hausman's House bill in the Senate? And if not, what seems to be the holdup? And so there's that question. And then another question from Mark Loftus that says, are any policymakers reluctant to support this plan because they're holding out for the prospect of high-speed rail? And so I wonder if Dennis is still on, if you would be able to address kind of some of the politics around the second train and transportation in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think in terms of high-speed rail, that really has come off the table in terms of any recent discussion. It really has been focused on the passenger rail, using the river route and really pairing that with the state rail plan, and the river route being the designated route moving this forward. As far as a companion bill in the transportation side of things, in the omnibus transportation, I think it really was about the targets and the amount of money that was looking to be spent. And the Republican leadership really felt as though that putting a bill forward that would target the bonding side of things was the most appropriate way of handling this infrastructure when it really came down to putting more rail in the ground. And so that's why we saw Senator Miller and Goggin and Senator Pappas jump on the opportunity to do passenger rail. And then we have always had support from Alice Hausman. She does have a bill both looking at a number of ways of funding passenger rail, from the $10 million to much larger bonding request and transportation request that would fund all of the studies and moving the whole thing forward. So that is really what the Great River Rail Commission has been focused on. There are other groups that have been very active in pursuing a companion bill in the Senate. But right now, the Great River Rail Commission has been focused on ensuring that the House was going to move forward and bring forward a passenger rail component, which they have at the 25 million. And now our work is cut out to ensure that the Senate mirrors that when they get to conference committee. So that really has been our main emphasis at this point in time.
I think maybe Dennis, if you keep you on for just one more second with another question. Thomas Day asked a question that's more around the messaging around the benefits of the second train. What's preventing the argument of efficient mass transportation being the central purpose of the second train? He asks.
I think what we've found in the Senate, on the Senate Republican side, and I don't want to lump everybody in the same jar and thought process, but by and large on the transportation, we have found a lot of traction and support from the improvement on rail because it's dual purpose. We're seeing a great efficiency on the freight side. When you put more tracks down and you talk and go back and look at the mainline improvements, you look at the bridge improvements, and that allows the passenger rail to more freely move and get support that way. So a lot of our Republican friends have said we love the fact that we can put infrastructure in, and to do that, the most appropriate way of funding infrastructure in the state of Minnesota has always been in that bonding side of things, or traditionally. So that's where we've found a lot of support this legislative session.
We had a couple of questions.
Maybe it looks like Trista was going to jump in too.
I just want to add, I think the most critical piece to remember when we're talking to our legislators is all the money is on the table. We're asking for Minnesota to be the last in. So oftentimes they want to see where other people have made investments or other groups have made. All the investments are in. We're just finishing it. So the risk is minimal, and it is a huge return on investment that we have laid out. So we're asking for the last piece from our state legislators, and I think that's really important.
Thank you very much. We had a couple of questions, both from Paul and from Joel, about the federal funding, and a couple of different nuances to those questions. One is a state match required to get the federal funding? And then two is, does it disappear ever? Does that first is it required to have state funding to be able to match that federal funding? And then two, will that federal grant disappear within a year or some period of time?
I can jump in and answer this, and Frank, feel free to join me in this. The federal grant that Wisconsin DOT and Minnesota DOT secured does require a local match. And in fact, the higher the local match, the better your chances are of getting the grant. We've seen that in Federal Transit Administration grants. It's also in Federal Railroad Administration grants. I think it's just a continuous theme of federal grant programs. They want local governments or project sponsors to put in more of their own money so that their federal money goes farther. Of course, we want just the opposite. We want more federal money so we can use our own local money on other things. So it does require a local match. And will the money go away? At some point, if we don't match the federal funds, it will go away. There's a thing that federal government employs called rescission, which is grant programs and other money that hasn't been spent can be rescinded and basically put back into the budget or used to balance the books at some point. And you can't risk keeping on asking for, can I have another year? Can I have another year to work on this project? We're getting closer, at some point, they're just going to say, we don't believe in you anymore. So we need to get this funding this year so we can push through this funding, so we can get our funding, so we can combine it with Wisconsin DOT, who has a little bit of work to do yet to get their funding, and get it all together and get it done. The longer you wait too, the more these costs go up. To buy anything, build anything, the cost always goes up from year to year. So to wait another year or 2 years just means the cost of this project is going to go up, and our federal money isn't going to go up. We're not going to get any more federal money if the project goes up by $1 million next year or year after. It's going to mean more local money. So now's the time.
Very good. We had a question, and I know we are over an hour by 9 minutes here, and we do want to wrap things up, but we have a number of great questions. We can certainly answer those for you if you want to contact us later. Let me do a couple of things here. One is, there was a question about fares to Chicago, how that compares to air travel or to passenger or to car travel. We've done comparisons like that, and some are available on our website, and so we can refer people to those. I do also want to make sure that a couple of other things are shared, and I'm going to put these links in the chat here real quickly. The first is that a new video was produced recently about the second train. We'd like for as many people as possible to be able to see that video. And so I shared the link in the chat here if you want to copy that down or go to it now. Watch the video, and then if you think it's good, let's have you share it on your social media channels. Finally, as many of our guests, speakers here have said today, contacting your legislators is the best way that you can show your support. But there are other ways. And so there's a link here to the greatriverrail.org Take Action 2021 page. If you go there, there's some other things that can help you to know what to do and how you can share. I think let's see here, there was a thing that I was just asking our Zoom person to do. I'm not sure if she saw that, but we could share a screen that shows the comparison. if we've got time. I'm not sure if we can figure out the technology here. We got a lot of communication going on behind the scenes to make it happen. Let me just real quick say to Mark, I think, who asked that question, that the comparison, when you just look at cost, is actually somewhat close as far as what does it cost you with money to go from one place to another. The comparison's not fair, though. There are some other things that you want to look at. And so some of the things that you want to look at are things like, where does the train deliver you, and where does the airplane deliver you? So you can get yourself to Midway or to O'Hare in Chicago. You still have to get yourself to downtown, but the train gets you to Union Station right in downtown Chicago. In addition to that, one of the things that was brought up earlier is that there are a lot of train stations between the Twin Cities and Chicago that do not have air service. So I saw an article just in the last week at a newspaper at the Wisconsin Dells, and most of the employees who work all summer long in Wisconsin Dells are coming from someplace else. They don't live in Wisconsin Dells. They live in the Twin Cities. They live in Chicago. They live in Winona. They go to the Wisconsin Dells. They work all week. Then they go home over the weekend, or vice versa, maybe. And so when you look at comparisons, we want to make sure that people look at comparisons from the perspective of, it's just different when you're traveling by air. You can't get to where you want to go many times, where the train does take you.
And Jeff, I think it's also important to, when you're doing comparisons, it's the travel time. It's like you were saying, if you go to Red Wing to park, you're not paying for parking. And then you can jump on the train to Chicago for a weekend or for a week. You're not going through metal detectors. You're not standing in a TSA line. I mean, there are just a number of other factors to consider. And yes, sometimes it does come to dollars and cents, but when you look at the totality of a trip, from point A to point B, if you're on an airplane, you're having to get to an airport, you're having to get to a downtown. And yes, if you're traveling to Chicago and you're not doing business in downtown, or you're not staying in downtown, you're going to have to get onto an Uber or other kinds of modes of transportation as well. But Chicago's got a number of other networks on the train travel if you're getting out to a suburb. So it's really the big picture that I think we have to keep reminding people. And it's really a convenience factor, we think, by having a second train that's on time and that's giving you options for travel times.
Kevin, I think we've made it to the end.
Excellent. I want to thank everyone for joining us again. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful evening. There's a wee bit of sunshine left if you want to get outside and enjoy that. Thank you very much for joining us here on this town hall forum for the Twin Cities, Milwaukee-Chicago second train. Thank you so much for your questions and comments. Keep them coming in. You can send them to us through the Great River Rail Commission's website. We've got an info line. You can contact us there. The Great River Rail Commission meets every couple of months. We have another meeting coming up in May. If you'd like to join us for the meeting, that's open to the public. You can join us for our Great River Rail Commission meeting. Otherwise, I'll say good night to you and thank you again for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner Drodos and Councilmember Prince, for being here and continuing to be champions too.
Mm-hmm.
Good night,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes, thank you to all our speakers and presenters too. And Frank, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.